Breaking: the WNBA didn't want this Caitlin Clark story to go public. And now that it's out, there's no putting it back in the box. We're talking about something the league has tried to bury. Something the front offices have refused to comment on. Something the veteran players have whispered about in locker rooms but never dared to say out loud. This isn't about a hard foul. This isn't about a trash-talking moment. This isn't about a rivalry with Angel Reese or a disagreement with Cheryl Swoops. This is bigger. Much bigger. This is about the truth behind the curtain. The truth about how the WNBA really felt when Caitlin Clark walked through their doors. The truth about what was said behind closed doors. The truth about the deals that were made and the deals that were killed because of one woman's arrival. Sources inside the league have started talking. And what they're revealing is explosive. They're talking about meetings where executives debated whether Clark was good for the brand. They're talking about veteran players threatening to sit out games if Clark got too much promotional attention. They're talking about sponsorship deals that were quietly pulled because certain stakeholders didn't want a white woman to become the face of a league that had been built by black women. And then there's the real bombshell. The WNBA actively tried to suppress Clark's endorsement opportunities. They wanted to slow down her rise. They wanted to manage her fame. They wanted to make sure she didn't overshadow the players who had been there for years. But here's the thing, Clark's team fought back. And when the league tried to silence them, they leaked everything. Now, the story is public. The media is circling. The fans are furious. And the WNBA is scrambling to contain the damage. In this video, we're going to reveal it all. The meetings. The emails. The quiet threats. The power struggles. The truth that the WNBA prayed would never see the light of day. Because this isn't just a basketball story anymore. This is a story about race, power, money, and control. This is the story the WNBA didn't want you to hear. Let's get into it. It was a cold Tuesday morning in February 2024. The WNBA headquarters in New York City was buzzing with quiet tension. Executives, marketing directors, and senior advisors had been called into an emergency meeting. The agenda was simple, but the implications were massive: the Caitlin Clark situation. Clark hadn't even been drafted yet. But her name was already causing fractures within the league office. On one side of the table sat the marketing team. They had the data. The numbers. The projections. They showed the executives that Clark was already the most searched women's basketball player in history, and she hadn't even played a single professional game. Her social media following was larger than the entire WNBA's combined. Her merchandise was selling out before she even had a team. She was a goldmine, they argued. A once-in-a-generation opportunity to take the league to heights it had never seen. On the other side of the table sat the Veteran Advisory Council, a group of former players and consultants who represented the old guard. They were skeptical. Defensive. Some were outright hostile to the idea of centering the league's marketing strategy around a white rookie from Iowa. One of them, whose name has been protected by our sources, said something that stunned the room. "We've spent 30 years building this league," she reportedly said. "Black women built this league. And now we're supposed to hand it over to a white girl from the Midwest who hasn't paid her dues. That's not going to happen. Not on my watch." The room went silent. Another executive reportedly countered, "We're not handing anything over. We're trying to grow the league. Clark brings viewers. She brings money. She brings attention. That benefits everyone." But the response was cold: "She brings white viewers. She brings suburban viewers. She brings viewers who never cared about us before. And they won't care about us after she's gone. We don't need her to save us. We need to protect what we've built." That tension, raw, ugly, and unspoken, defined the meeting. And according to multiple sources, that meeting set the tone for everything that followed. Over the next several weeks, the league's treatment of Clark became increasingly hostile, not in public, but behind closed doors. Marketing budgets were quietly diverted away from Clark. Promotional materials featuring her were delayed or scaled back. Sponsors were warned, off the record, that Clark was high risk and unproven. It was subtle. It was quiet. And it was devastating. Because while the world saw Clark being celebrated on draft night, what they didn't see was the quiet war being waged to limit her influence. To control her narrative. To make sure she didn't become bigger than the league itself. But Clark's team wasn't oblivious. They had sources too. And when they started catching wind of what was happening, they prepared for battle. The war was about to go public. By late spring, the tension between Clark's camp and the WNBA front office had reached a boiling point. Clark's agents, the ones who had negotiated her lucrative Nike deal before she even declared for the draft, had started noticing the delays. The canceled meetings. The last-minute changes to promotional schedules. The quiet removal of Clark's name from certain marketing campaigns. At first, they assumed it was just logistical chaos. Draft season is always messy. But then they started hearing whispers from inside the league. The same whisper that had been heard in that February meeting, the league was trying to slow Clark down. One of Clark's agents made a phone call to a senior WNBA executive. The conversation was tense. Direct. Uncomfortable. "Are you guys trying to kill her momentum?" the agent asked. "We're trying to protect the integrity of the league," the executive replied. And then came the line that changed everything, the line that would ultimately become the centerpiece of the leak. "Integrity," the agent responded. "You mean you're trying to protect your veterans from looking bad? You don't want a 22-year-old white girl making your legends look like they're not good enough." The executive didn't deny it. They didn't even argue. They simply said, "This is bigger than one player. You need to understand that." That conversation was recorded, and it was about to become the most damaging piece of evidence against the WNBA. Over the following weeks, Clark's team began gathering information. They compiled internal emails, marketing documents, meeting notes, statements from disgruntled employees who had witnessed the league's hostility firsthand. And then, on a Friday afternoon in June, just hours after Clark's incident with the veteran player, they made a decision: they would leak it all. The first drop came from an anonymous source speaking to a major sports outlet. The headline read, "WNBA executives worked to limit Caitlin Clark's endorsement opportunities." The story cited internal documents and anonymous sources detailing the league's efforts to manage Clark's rise. The response was immediate. Social media exploded. Fans were furious. Analysts were stunned. The league was forced to issue a tepid statement denying any wrongdoing, but the damage was done. Then came the second drop, a recording of the agent's phone call with the executive. The audio went viral within hours. Millions of people heard the executive refuse to deny that they were trying to slow Clark down. The league was in crisis mode. PR teams were scrambling. Executives were refusing to answer phone calls. Players were being asked for comments that they didn't want to give. And Caitlin Clark? She stayed quiet. She refused to comment. She let the story breathe on its own. Because she knew, her team knew, that the truth was more powerful than any denial. And the truth was that the WNBA had been actively working against its biggest star. The leaks didn't stop there. Over the following days, more information came out. Details about the February meeting. Names of the veterans who had spoken against Clark. Evidence of sponsorship deals that had been quietly killed. It was a full-scale exposé, and the WNBA had no idea how to stop it. By the end of the week, the league had become a laughingstock. Critics were calling it out for its hypocrisy. For its inability to embrace its most marketable player. for its fear of change. And Clark, despite everything, was still out there. Scoring. Winning. Thriving. The league had tried to bury her. But she was rising anyway. The leaks didn't just expose the front office. They exposed the players too. Because while the veterans had been united in their skepticism of Clark, and in some cases, their outright hostility, the younger players were starting to speak up. And their voices were shaking the foundation of the league. A group of second-year and third-year players, many of them women of color who had come into the league without any hype or attention, started quietly organizing. They saw what was happening to Clark and recognized the pattern. It was the same pattern they had experienced themselves, the veterans controlling the narrative, the front office prioritizing the old guard, and the rookies being forced to earn their place through pain and silence. But Clark was different. She had power. She had a platform. And she wasn't afraid to use it, even if it meant fighting the league itself. One of those young players, let's call her Maya, gave an anonymous interview to a sports podcast that went viral. She said, "I saw how they treated Caitlin from day one. And honestly, I wasn't surprised. Because I saw the same thing happen to me. It just didn't make the news because nobody cared about me. But Caitlin? She's too big to ignore." And that's exactly why they couldn't stand her. That quote cut deep. Because it exposed a painful truth. The WNBA had always been a league that protected its veterans at the expense of its rookies. But with Clark, the stakes were higher. And the cameras were everywhere. Other players started speaking up, cautiously at first, then more boldly. Some veterans defended the league, arguing that Clark had been given preferential treatment from the start. But others, including some of the league's biggest names, started to distance themselves from the hostility. Aya Wilson, who had previously tried to stay neutral, gave a measured interview. "I think there are growing pains when any new star enters the league. But I also think we need to be careful about how we treat each other. We're all sisters in this game." Breanna Stewart was more direct. "I've been watching what's happening. And I think some people need to check themselves. We can't be the league that tears down our own players. That's not who we are." But the most powerful statement came from an unexpected source, Diana Taurasi. The legend herself, the player many had assumed would be hostile to Clark's arrival, surprised everyone by praising her. "Caitlin is the future," Taurasi said. "I've been in this league for 20 years. I've seen it all. And I can tell you, this kid is special. She's going to be one of the greatest. And anyone who can't see that is either blind or jealous. Probably both." That statement was a game changer. Because Taurasi was the one player whose opinion everyone respected. She had earned her place. She had nothing to prove. And when she spoke, people listened. Suddenly, the anti-Clark faction within the league started to lose its grip. The veterans who had been hostile found themselves isolated. The front office, already under fire from the leaks, couldn't afford to alienate Taurasi, or the young players who were now speaking out. The tide was turning. But the war wasn't over. Not yet. Because the leaks had also exposed something deeper, the WNBA's inability to handle its own success. The league had spent 3 decades building something beautiful, and now it was terrified that a white woman was going to take the credit. That fear, ugly, irrational, and undeniable, was the real villain in this story. And it wasn't going away overnight. Here's something the WNBA didn't want you to know: sponsorship deals were being killed behind the scenes. Big brands. Multi-million-dollar contracts. All quietly disappearing because of Caitlin Clark's name. Let's talk about what really happened. When Clark declared for the draft, the marketing world went crazy. She was the most marketable women's basketball player in history. Brands were lining up. Nike had already secured her. But there were others: Gatorade, State Farm, Under Armour, even Apple, who were preparing massive offers. But then something strange happened. Several of those offers were suddenly delayed. Negotiations stalled. Meetings were cancelled. And the reason, according to insiders, was the WNBA itself. League executives reportedly reached out to major sponsors, off the record, and told them that Clark was risky and unpredictable. They warned that she might not handle the transition to the pros well. That she might be a one-season wonder. That the media scrutiny might break her. It was a calculated campaign to discourage brands from investing in Clark before the league could control her narrative. And it worked, to some extent. Several deals were paused indefinitely. One major beverage company allegedly reduced its offer by 40% after receiving a confidential briefing from the league. But Clark's agent didn't back down. They confronted the league directly and threatened legal action. And when the leaks went public, the brands started to realize they had been manipulated. A Gatorade executive, speaking anonymously, later admitted, "We were told to wait. We were told to see how she performed in the WNBA before committing. But honestly, it felt like we were being steered away from her. I think the league wanted to make sure she didn't get too big too fast." That quote made headlines. And it forced the league to go into damage control mode. They issued statements. They called meetings. They tried to assure sponsors that they fully supported Clark. But the damage was done. The world had seen the truth. The WNBA was trying to kill Clark's endorsement momentum before it could take off. Clark, for her part, didn't let it stop her. She signed a massive deal with Nike that had been negotiated before the draft, a deal that had been structured to be independent of the league's approval. It was a masterstroke. And it meant that Clark's financial future was already secure, no matter what the league did. But other brands were watching. And the WNBA's reputation among corporate partners was severely damaged. Several sponsors reportedly reconsidered their overall investment in the league, questioning whether they wanted to be associated with an organization that actively worked against its own players. The irony was brutal. In trying to control Clark, the WNBA had hurt itself. And the sponsors weren't done. Some of them started quietly approaching Clark's camp directly, bypassing the league entirely. They recognized that Clark was bigger than the WNBA, and that her personal brand was worth more than the league's collective reputation. The league had tried to hold her back. But in doing so, they had handed her the ultimate weapon, freedom. So where does the WNBA go from here? The leaks have exposed the ugly underbelly of the league. The meetings. The manipulation. The quiet racism. The economic sabotage. It's all out there now, and there's no going back. But here's the thing about crises, they can either destroy you or transform you. The WNBA has a choice. They can continue to fight Caitlin Clark. Continue to limit her endorsements. Continue to protect their veterans at her expense. Continue to pretend that the old guard should always take priority over the new. And if they do, they will lose. Not just Clark, but the millions of new fans she brought. The media attention. The sponsorship dollars. The cultural relevance. They will lose everything they've been fighting for. Or they can embrace her. Make her the face of the league. Build marketing campaigns around her. Give her the full weight of their promotional power. Let her elevate everyone, not just herself. Because the truth is, Clark doesn't need the WNBA. The WNBA needs her. She's already one of the most famous athletes in the world. She's already got the Nike deal. The fan base. The media presence. She doesn't need the league's approval, she's proven that. But the league needs her. Desperately. Without Clark, the WNBA is a niche sport watched by hardcore fans. With her, it's a cultural phenomenon. The numbers speak for themselves. Before Clark, the WNBA Finals averaged 1.2 million viewers. With Clark, regular season games are drawing over 2 million. The audience is growing. The revenue is growing. The future is bright. But only if the league gets out of its own way. There are signs that things are changing. Some of the veterans who were hostile have quieted down. The front office has publicly pledged to support all players equally. And Clark herself has continued to handle everything with grace and class. She hasn't played the victim. She hasn't lashed out. She's just kept playing and winning. And that's the real story here. The story of a young woman who faced the full weight of an entire league and refused to be broken. The WNBA didn't want this story to go public. They wanted to control it. Manage it. Bury it. But they couldn't. Because the truth always finds a way out.